The 5-year-old who once begged for a photo with a legend just made that legend say 2 words nobody expected. A 5-year-old girl once stood nervously in front of a 5-time Grand Slam champion, camera in her small hands, just hoping for a photo. Nobody in that moment had any reason to remember her face. Fast forward almost 2 decades, and that exact champion looked at what this girl had become and wrote something in public that stopped an entire sport in its tracks. 2 words. That's all it took. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why those 2 words carried more weight than almost any endorsement in modern tennis. But here's the part of this story almost nobody talks about, the part that comes right after the fairy tale, the part where the same girl who made history had to walk back onto a court 48 hours later and lose in front of the entire world that was suddenly watching her for the first time. I'm going to show you both sides of this, the miracle and the crash that followed it, because you cannot understand one without the other. Stay to the end, because there's a warning buried in this story too, something even her biggest supporters admit is still holding her back from the very top. Before we go further, if this is the kind of story you want to keep following, subscribe now. Not because I need the number, but because this is a story that's still being written in real time, and the version of it you'll get anywhere else is going to be the highlight reel without the context, without the weight of what came before it and what almost got lost in between. I'm going to keep tracking every chapter of this journey as it happens, and I want you here for the parts nobody else is explaining properly. Hit subscribe, and let's get into it. This story starts with a poster on a bedroom wall in the Philippines. A young girl taped up a photo of Maria Sharapova above her desk, the same way millions of kids around the world pin up their heroes and never get any closer than the television screen. But this girl was different. She has described that picture as her 5th grade project, and she has talked openly about what drew her to Sharapova, the fire, the refusal to give up on a single point, the presence. Most children who admire an athlete like that stay admirers from a distance forever. Alex Eala did not stay at a distance. At just 13 years old, she left home to train at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, trading a normal childhood for 6-hour days on Spanish clay courts, chasing something she couldn't fully put into words yet. For years, that's where the story mostly stayed, inside academy reports and junior rankings, known to tennis insiders but invisible to almost everyone else. Talent alone doesn't make headlines. What changes everything is the moment that talent collides with an opportunity nobody expected her to get. That moment arrived in the spring of 2025, at the Miami Open, and what happened next still doesn't fully make sense on paper. Eala entered as a wild card ranked 140th in the world. She left having beaten 3 Grand Slam champions back-to-back. First Yelena Ostapenko, then Madison Keys, then Iga Swiatek, the world number 2 at the time, in the quarterfinals. 19 years old, and she had just become the first woman from the Philippines to ever crack the top 100, the first to reach a WTA semifinal, and the first to beat a top 30 opponent in the history of Philippine tennis. And she'd done it 3 times in a row. She ran into Jessica Pegula in the semifinal, a player who had grown up around that exact tournament, practically a hometown favorite on her own court. Except it didn't feel that way. Pegula would later admit the crowd was overwhelmingly behind Eala that night, so loud and so one-sided that she turned to her own team in disbelief, wondering where all these fans had suddenly come from. Eala lost that match in 3 tight sets. But by then, the result almost didn't matter anymore. Something bigger had already happened, and it wasn't going to stop at Miami. A few months later at the US Open, she made history again, becoming the first Filipina to win a Grand Slam main draw match in the Open era, coming back from a set down in a marathon 3-setter. 2 milestones in a single summer. A fan base that had barely existed at the start of the year had turned into something closer to a movement, one that reached far past the Philippines into Filipino communities scattered across the globe. And that's when the biggest names in the sport started noticing something they couldn't ignore. At the Australian Open in January 2026, the crowds trying to watch Eala's first-round match grew so large that organizers had to deal with lines spilling outside the venue, fans watching from big screens because there wasn't room inside. Novak Djokovic, 24 Grand Slam titles deep into his own career, was asked about it directly. He didn't brush it off. He called it a good problem to have, and he said something that mattered more than the compliment itself, that entire countries were discovering tennis for the first time because they finally had someone of their own to root for. That's not a passing comment from a man who has spent 2 decades at the center of this sport. That's an acknowledgement that something real was shifting. A month later in Dubai, it happened again. Coco Gauff faced Eala in the quarterfinals and beat her comfortably, 6-0, 6-2, in front of a stadium chanting a name that wasn't hers. Instead of letting it sit awkwardly, Gauff addressed it head-on in her on-court interview, thanking Eala directly for bringing what she called a new demographic into tennis, telling the Filipino fans in the stands to keep being loud, keep showing up. That same week, Jessica Pegula won the Dubai title, and in her own championship press conference, reporters kept steering the conversation back to Eala anyway. Pegula didn't dodge it. She spoke about the pressure of carrying an entire country's hopes and said Eala handled that weight with a maturity well beyond her years. 2 of the best players in the world, in the same stretch of weeks, independently saying some version of the same thing. That's not manufactured hype. That's something real happening in real time. But nothing that had come before prepared anyone for what happened at Wimbledon in July 2026. In the 3rd round, Eala walked out to face Iga Swiatek, the defending Wimbledon champion, the same player she had stunned back in Miami over a year earlier. This time there was no surprise involved. Swiatek knew exactly who was standing across the net. It didn't matter. Eala won it in straight sets, 7-6 in a tense first-set tiebreak, then 6-2 to close it out, dethroning the defending champion and becoming the first Filipino player in history, man or woman, to reach the second week of Wimbledon in the Open era. And this is where the story folds back on itself in a way almost nobody could have scripted. Within hours of that win, Maria Sharapova, the woman on the poster, the 5-time Grand Slam champion this girl had once nervously approached for a photo at 5 years old, posted a 2-word reaction. What a star! Not a long tribute. Not a paragraph. 2 words from the exact person whose game she had spent her childhood trying to copy. People who understand tennis know that word doesn't get used casually by someone like Sharapova. It's reserved for players who don't just show talent, but the kind of presence that can change a sport. Billie Jean King went even further, meeting Eala in person after the win, sharing a hug, and leaving her with 4 words that weren't spoken for any camera. Keep going for it. This from a woman who beat Bobby Riggs in the most famous exhibition match tennis has ever seen, who has spent 50 years recognizing greatness before the rest of the world catches up to it. So here's where the fairy tale usually ends in the version of this story everyone else tells you. It doesn't end there. Because 2 days later, carrying the weight of the biggest win of her career and an entire tennis world suddenly watching her every move, Eala walked back onto the court in the round of 16 and lost in 3 hard-fought sets to Jasmine Paolini. The dream of a Wimbledon quarterfinal, one that had felt within reach less than 48 hours earlier, ended just like that. That's the part of the story the highlight reels leave out. Every opponent studies you harder after a win like that. Every expectation gets heavier. And she found that out in real time, in front of the biggest audience of her life. Even in that loss, nothing about what she'd already built got erased. But it does raise the honest question hanging over everything else in this story, and the analysts who follow her closely haven't been shy about it. Her serve. By almost every statistical measure, it still sits outside the top tier of the tour, and it doesn't produce the free points the very best players lean on in the biggest moments. Against elite opponents, that gap can be the difference between a signature win and a signature collapse. Even her most devoted supporters admit that fixing this is the one thing standing between spectacular runs and becoming a consistent threat in Grand Slam finals. So where does that actually leave her right now? Not at the very top. Not yet. Somewhere in the most unpredictable stretch any young athlete goes through, the stretch between extraordinary promise and lasting greatness, where the numbers say she could go either way. History is full of players who shine for one unforgettable season and never find the next gear. It's also full of the rare ones who do. What makes her story feel different isn't just the results. It's who's already paying attention. A 24-time Grand Slam champion who watched the crowds gather around her and called it a good problem to have. A 2-time major winner who thanked her, on camera, for changing who shows up to watch this sport. A world number 4 who admitted she felt like the visiting player on her own home court because of the fans Eala pulled in. And a 5-time Grand Slam champion, the same one from the poster on that bedroom wall, who looked at what that little girl became and needed only 2 words to say it. What happens from here is genuinely not decided yet. The serve either gets fixed or it doesn't. The next big stage either turns into another Miami or another round of 16 exit. I don't know which version of this story we're going to get, and if I told you I did, I'd be lying to you. What I do know is that I'm going to keep tracking every step of it as it happens, the wins and the collapses both, because this story only makes sense when you see both sides of it. If you want to be here for whatever comes next, subscribe now so you don't miss it. Tell me in the comments what you think happens the next time she walks onto a big stage carrying this much weight. I'll see you in the next one.